He could hear the wolves again. Not the soft, distant kind that haunt the edge of dreams, but the real kind. Hungry. Close. Io pressed his back to the stone, heart thudding in his throat, watching the frosty breaths of his companions rise in shallow puffs against the pale blue sky. The sun was rising, but the warmth it promised would be late in coming, and short in stay. Another cold day in a cold world. No sparks. No flame. No fire. There had never been fire. And everything was built around that truth. They called it the long night, though not because it lasted longer than any other. It was just, colder. Harder. And it returned every time the sun dipped behind the western cliffs, leaving the world in a silence so deep you could feel it press on your bones. Without fire, humans never shaped the world as we know it. There were no hearths, no torches, no charred meat or molten metal. Progress had limped along on the raw edges of stone and bone, shaped only by the sun's mercy and the moon's indifference. Civilization existed, but it was slower, smaller, cautious. Fragile. Io was a hunter. Not because he wanted to be, but because his clan needed him to be. The frost stalks, those enormous, shaggy, elk-like beasts that roamed the southern glaciers, were too dangerous for older hunters now. Too quick. Too clever. Without fire to forge spearheads or war-making joints, strength was fleeting and youth was king. But youth also died first. He exhaled slowly, calming his pulse. Then, with a silent nod, he darted from the rock and sprinted across the white plain. Around him, snow crunched beneath his bare-wrapped feet, a sound like crushed bones. He held a spear of obsidian, chipped with careful flint work, and his eyes locked onto the distant shape moving between icy trees. The creature was massive. Its breath alone formed clouds. It was armored in fur thicker than any Io had seen before. It hadn't sensed him yet. That was good. He was close. Closer. Then something snapped behind him. Not a stick. Not a rock. A warning. He spun just in time to see the flash of gray teeth, the blur of motion, a wolf, pale as bone, lunging from a hollow. He raised his spear on instinct, driving the point upward. The wolf howled in pain but not before it sank its teeth into Io's arm. He screamed. Not because of the pain, he was used to that, but because the scent of blood now filled the air. And in this world, the smell of blood in the cold meant death. The world without flame. Long ago, the story goes, the first of our kind watched lightning split the sky and saw a forest burn. In our world, they captured that fire, protected it, and passed it down like a god's secret. It gave warmth. It gave protection. It gave progress. But not in this world. In this timeline, those fires were never caught. The rains came before the brave could try. The fire vanished before hands could hold it. And fear replaced curiosity. Fire was never trusted. And so, it was forgotten. Without fire, nights were darker. Winters were longer. Food was never cooked, only dried or eaten raw. Disease spread more easily. Metalwork never began. Wheels took centuries longer to invent. Books were never burned, but they also were never written. Humanity learned to fear the dark because there was no light. And yet, they survived. Through stubbornness. Through instinct. Through an intimate partnership with the sun. Clans were built around the seasonal rhythms of solar life. Homes were carved into stone for insulation. Tunnels ran beneath hillsides like mole warrens, preserving precious warmth from bodies and earth. Animal skins were sacred, and the bones of beasts were bartered like gold. Innovation, though slow, was not dead. They learned to ferment roots for nutrition. Learned to tame certain beasts, not with branding or cages, but through empathy and mimicry. They developed tools of ice and bone, and even crude forms of harnessed wind power, using wide-leaf sails on river crafts to navigate icy currents. They were not primitive. Just cold. The hunter's return. Io's clan saw him returning with bloodied fur and broken breath. They rushed to meet him, some with weapons, others with healing moss and root salves. His wound was shallow, but it would fester if left untreated. Infection, not wolves, killed most hunters. His prize, however, was enough to draw cheers. The froststalk he'd wounded had collapsed only 100 meters from the edge of the hunting range. Its meat would feed dozens. Its hide would become coats, boots, and bedding. Its bones would become tools. Io collapsed to his knees beside it, breathing in the warm steam rising from its still heart. For a moment, he imagined it, what it would be like to eat this creature cooked. To feel warmth inside his stomach. Not just the distant heat of digestion, but the deep, primal burn of flame-kissed flesh. It was a blasphemous thought. He said nothing. But he was not alone in dreaming it. Sun priests and ice whisperers. Each village had its own leaders, but among them all, two castes held the most sway, the sun priests and the ice whisperers. The sun priests were guardians of the ancient rites, those who charted the sky, who knew when the solstices would arrive, who preached gratitude to the heavens for the brief gift of daylight. They painted their faces with ochre and gold, wore crowns of bone and sunlight-colored feathers, and spoke in slow, careful tones. They believed that humanity's purpose was to learn to live without taking too much. To survive without heat. To prove to the gods they were worthy of something greater than fire. The ice whisperers were different. They did not look to the sky, but to the deep. To the frozen lakes and the forgotten mountains. They believed the secret to survival lay in listening to the earth, not the sun. They built maps of ice layers, studied the shifting patterns of snow dunes, and learned to hear tremors in the glaciers long before they cracked. And then there were the heretics. Those who believed that maybe, fire could still be found. That it could be earned, not feared. Whispers spoke of a rebel clan in the far south, beyond the volcanic scars of the Cradlelands, those black peaks that spewed smoke but no flame. It was said that they had found a way to create light. Not from fire, but from the power of crushed stone and pressure. Sparks that glowed blue. Heat that shimmered but did not burn. Of course, these were just stories. Until one day, a child was born. A child who would change everything. Her name was Naya. And from the moment she was born, the sky changed. The elders of the eastern ridge whispered that the sun lingered an hour longer the day she arrived. That the bird circled twice, not once, over the birthing stones. That her first cry echoed like thunder in the stillness of dusk. But the most startling thing? She was warm. Not just pink with blood and life, but genuinely warm. Her body gave off heat, even in the frost-swept cave. Midwives pulled their hands away, blinking, whispering to one another in disbelief. Newborns were always cold, often dangerously so. But Naya glowed with a kind of inner pulse, as though she had stolen a secret from the sky. The clan kept it quiet. In a world without fire, heat was a miracle. Or a threat. Growing in the cold. Naya grew faster than others. Stronger. Her eyes were bright with curiosity, not just the wide-eyed wonder of a child, but something older. Sharper. She learned to tie bone hooks by age 4. She tracked snow hares alone by 6. She could survive days in the wild without freezing, even when others layered skins upon skins. By 10, she began asking questions that made the clan nervous. Why can't we shape stone into glowing metal? Why do we fear what the mountains cough into the sky? Why does the sun give us heat, but we never make our own? The elders answered with stories. Parables. Warnings. But Naya wasn't interested in stories. She wanted evidence. One night, while the others slept, she found 2 stones, obsidian and flint. She struck them together, over and over. The sound echoed through the cavern like bone drums. Her hands ached. Her fingers bled. Then it happened. A spark. Tiny. Brief. But real. It flared, hissed, and vanished into the dark. She stared at the spot for hours. It hadn't given heat. It hadn't made light. But it wanted to. And that was enough. The forbidden stones. When the clan found her the next morning, surrounded by strange black rocks, they panicked. The sun priests called it a curse. The ice whisperers called it madness. Her parents stood behind her, but barely. They were afraid, not just for her, but of her. No one had tried to make fire in generations. It wasn't even considered. Not because it couldn't be done, but because it was wrong. Fire, the elders said, was theft. The gods of the sun had chosen not to give it. To chase it was arrogance. It would bring ruin. But Naya wouldn't stop. She didn't believe in ruin. She believed in progress. And one night, after gathering stones and dried moss in secret, she struck a spark again, this time, into the dry nest of shredded root bark and old feather. And this time, it caught. The flame was so small. So weak. But the heat it gave off was undeniable. She reached out with trembling fingers. It burned. She laughed. It burned more. She didn't care. She was crying. Exile. The next morning, smoke clung to her hair. The elders didn't need to ask questions. The sun priests saw it immediately. One even wept. She was given no trial. No chance to explain. The punishment for invoking fire was not death. It was exile. Naya left the eastern ridge with only a cloak, a stone knife, and the memory of warmth on her skin. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She walked into the white quiet, the name given to the southlands where snow fell like breath and winds whispered promises to the dead. She would find others. She would build something new. The Flame Bringers. For 2 years, Naya vanished from the oral history of her people. But whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Wanderers spoke of a girl with fire in her hands. Hunters told of southern trees scorched at their base. One ice whisperer reported seeing strange plumes on the horizon, clouds that curled and danced unnaturally, not from storms, but from something else. Then came the stories. Of the Flame Bringers. A new clan, nomadic, fire-born. They cooked food. Heated shelters. Made tools from softened stone. Carried glowing embers in stone bowls lined with moss and charcoal, wrapped in ash-soaked cloth to keep the fire alive. They were small. Scattered. But growing. Not everyone welcomed them. Most didn't. But others came anyway. The sick. The cold. The curious. They found Naya at the center. Her eyes burned as much as her fires did now. She had learned to control it. To grow it. To use it not for destruction, but for survival. Resistance. Not all change is welcome. As the Flame Bringers gained attention, so too did they earn enemies. Sun priests called them heretics. They warned of apocalypse, that the gods would take the sun away if humans played with heat. That ice would swallow the land again. That stars would fall. A few clans offered trade. Quietly. In secret. But most declared Naya a threat to the balance of nature. They sent warriors. And the warriors found something they had never seen before. Not weapons made of stone and bone, but tools strengthened in fire. Spears with hardened tips. Nets made from sinew boiled and stretched to impossible lengths. Homes warmed from within. Crops growing in hot beds of soil thawed by fire-warmed stones. But what disturbed them most? Children laughing. In the dark. With no fear. A world divided. Fire had always been a question of, why not? Now it became a question of, what next? Clans divided. Some joined Naya. Others doubled down in tradition. Lines were drawn not by territory, but by belief. Those who feared fire began developing alternative ways to compete. The Ice Whisperers learned to harness geothermal vents in the far north, capturing steam to warm their chambers. The Sun Priests began focusing on lenses, giant circles of polished ice, to concentrate sunlight in dangerous, weapon-like bursts. A cold war began. Not over land. But over heat. The First Flame War. It wasn't called that then, of course. But historians would later agree, it started when a traveling envoy from the southern Glint tribe, known allies of the Flame Bringers, was attacked crossing the River Rith. Their caravan was burned. Not with fire. But with sunlight. Iceland's bursts melted their sleds. Animals were blinded. Trade was severed. Tensions exploded. Naya didn't retaliate with war, but with demonstration. She invited leaders of neutral tribes to a summit. She showed them the warmth of homes, the strength of fire-hardened tools, the speed of cooking, the end of disease through sterilization. She healed their sick with boiling cloth and dried herbs. And then she asked, "Do you fear destruction? Or do you fear change?" The world was no longer silent. Gone were the days when human whispers disappeared into cold winds, when caves echoed with nothing but frost. Now, there were songs. Hammer strikes. Sparks. Cries of birth and battle. 1,000 tiny fires flickered across the world, each one shouting into the dark, "We are here." But light always casts shadows. And the deeper the glow of fire spread, the longer the reach of those shadows became. The Frostborn. In the mountains far to the east, where stars bled blue and the sky never softened, the last of the old tribes gathered. The Cold Orders, the Ice Whisperers, the Sun Priests, those who had refused fire and adapted in its absence, united under a single cause. They called themselves the Frostborn. To them, fire was not just dangerous, it was evil. An unnatural element stolen from the divine realm, a force never meant for human hands. They believed the fire had already begun poisoning the land, forests burned too quickly, animals fled the warmth, and strange illnesses emerged in the smoke. The Frostborn didn't evolve with fire, they evolved against it. They mastered silence. Cold-forged tools. Night movement. They bred animals with thick hides and learned to harvest minerals directly from ice veins. And with their giant lenses of ice and mirrored metal, they could concentrate sunlight to sear from afar. A cold alchemy bloomed in their frozen halls. They weren't preparing to survive the coming war. They were preparing to win it. The Flameborn cities. Meanwhile, the world of the Flameborn was unrecognizable. Once nomads of skin and stone, Naya's followers now built permanent settlements, cities, with clay bricks hardened in kilns, iron drawn from stone, and towers lit with open flame. Roads were built with glowing stone, paths kept warm so travel could continue even during snowfall. They mastered food preservation, steaming, brewing, metallurgy. Fire had become more than survival. It had become civilization. And Naya? She no longer led from the front. She was older now. Wiser. Her once golden hair now streaked with gray, her hands scarred from 1,000 burns. But her fire hadn't dimmed. She taught. She mentored. And when the whispers came, of war, of invasion, she gathered her council beneath the great hearth of Emberhold and asked just one question. Do we still remember what this was for? The First Flame War, the fall of the Skyglass. The Frostborn struck first. Using their perfected solar lens weapons, they focused beams of raw light onto the northern cities of the Flameborn. Roofs exploded. Forests ignited. Panic spread like oil. Refugees fled southward. But the Flameborn responded, not with destruction, but defense. They had constructed skyglass domes, enormous shelters of fused sand, curved to redirect heat and shield flame. Naya had personally overseen their design. They saved thousands. But one, Skyglass Emberhold, collapsed during the third attack. And Naya was inside. The woman who brought fire to the world died not in conquest, but in protection. She didn't raise a sword. She raised a shield. The spark of peace. Naya's death did not ignite vengeance. It ignited unity. Her final writings, found in a sealed vault beneath the Emberhold dome, became a kind of sacred text, not religious, but foundational. She had written not about domination, but coexistence. About finding balance between heat and cold, light and dark. She believed the Frostborn were not enemies, but mirrors. They were who humanity could have been. And who it still was, in part. Her death led to a fragile summit. Fire and frost sat at the same table. No longer to argue whether fire should exist, but how both societies could shape the world together. The new era, flame and frost. Generations passed. Some Flameborn and Frostborn married, merging traditions. New tools were created, ice lenses for surgical precision in medicine, fire kills for healing pottery. Heating and cooling systems co-evolved. Schools taught both alchemy of fire and architecture of ice. Humanity didn't become one thing. It became many things, each born from the question: what if we hadn't discovered fire? And the answer, ultimately, was this. We would have survived. But we would have waited. We would have wandered longer. Dreamed slower. Feared the night a little more. But eventually, some spark, within or without, would have lit the way forward. It was never about the fire. It was about the one who struck the stones. Epilogue, the Eternal Flame. Hundreds of years after Naya's time, beneath the great library dome of the Fire and Frost Alliance, a single ember still glows. It's kept alive by hand, by heart, by oath. Not because they need the heat anymore. But because they remember the cold. And they honor the girl who changed the world not by fighting the dark, but by daring to light a spark.